we're going to get started. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to the budget breakdown. My name is Dr. Lisa Hess, and I proudly serve the district and the community as superintendent. With me is Mrs. Kelly Price. She is the CFO, and she will be presenting most of the budget information this evening. So every year we present the proposed budget for the next school year to provide the opportunity for the community to ask questions in advance of the presentation so that we can provide accurate answers here at the budget breakdown. Those questions, along with the answers, are woven throughout this presentation. And so we hope you find tonight helpful in your own understanding of the facts about all the aspects of the district's budget and how taxpayer money is being spent to provide a quality education and learning environment for all students. So let's start up with some facts about our school district. Jonathan? Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So, we have 4,100 students, pre-K to age 22, and the reason why age 22 is there, at the beginning of the school year, PEE stated that all districts must provide special education students free and appropriate education under the IDA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, until they're 22. We have 800 plus employees. We have full-time, part-time, and stipend employees on a 100-acre campus with 6 educational buildings. We have 500 residents serving 5 municipalities and a 41 square miles encompassing rural and urban areas. So, out of our 41 and 3 students, 49% qualify for state assistance. So that's 2,048 students who get free lunch, free and reduced lunch. And because of that, we qualify for what's called CEP, Community Eligible Program. And so we are able to provide free breakfast and free lunch to all students in the district. So total student population by race and ethnicity, you see there. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because I want to show you our community makeup. This is going to become important later when I talk about our English language learner students. And here is our total student population broken down by special education services and English language learners. So we currently have 21% special education students that make up our population. And the last time we looked at this, last year, it was 18%. And we also have 6% English language learners, which is 254 students. And the last time we looked at this, it was 3.8%. So in both of those categories, which are high need areas, we are growing as a district. So I'm going to pass the mic over, well, not literally the mic, but the clicker over to Kelly, and she's going to talk about some budget indicators.
Okay, so let's compare ourselves to other districts. Everybody, thinks about it that way. How do we rank up? So right here, we're comparing, this is for last year, or this year, this current year, and this is compared to 18 districts in Berks County. So we are the 5th largest student enrollment with our student enrollment. The 5th largest budget with an $80 million budget. We're the 8th lowest millage rate at 30.1 mils currently. So there's many more schools higher than that. 13th in budget increase of only 1.75% last year, and 17th in per pupil spending at $19,182 a student. And that's just a mathematical calculation that they provide to us. It's not actually that number specifically. And then here is how we compare with those same districts in terms of millage. So this shows all the districts, all 18 here in Berks County, and the average millage rate in Berks County is 31.29 mils. So that's that maroon line there. And then you see Governor Mifflin there, right at 8th, and we fall below that average for the county. And we're right around, if you look at the schools around us there, we're around Kutztown and Ole. Those really aren't schools we compare ourselves with. They're much smaller than our district. So So we don't really compare ourselves to a school like that because we're not size-wise comparable. We're actually much more comparable with Muhlenberg and Exeter. And you do see on this slide, Muhlenberg and Exeter are much further down with millage rates that are above what the county average is for that. So will there be a tax increase this year? Right now, the budget we're presenting this evening is proposed to have a 1.45 mil increase. So that's a proposal at the moment. That doesn't mean anything's being set. That's what is in this proposal. And we're going to talk tonight about why that is. So here is a summary of what is proposed and what is included in the numbers that we're going to talk about this evening. So the proposed tax increase is 1.45 mils. That would be a millage rate for 24-25 of 31.55 mils. And that's a 4.8% increase over 23-24. Average assessment in our district, so this is taken from our homestead information that we get from the county every year. The average assessment of a property in our school district for homes is $125,935. That's the assessed value of the properties. So for that property, that would be $182.61 for the year. That would be the increase, or $15.22 per month. So if you're someone who has an escrow in connection with your mortgage, that's something that your mortgage company would make sure is included in your monthly payment so that that can be taken care of in some time. And then the majority of our assessments, so 75% of the homes in our district are assessed at $153,500 or less. So that's where the majority of everyone falls. And that would equate to an annual tax bill of $4,842.92, or an increase of $222.58, or $18.55 per month increase. So here we're looking at actual millage rate versus Act 1. So the Act 1 index, that's the percentage set by the state that tells schools how much they are able to raise the millage rate by without any kind of voter referendum or exceptions. So that is across the state set. It's the total for PA was 5.3%, and then districts who have what they call a market value personal income aid ratio greater than 0.4, those school districts get an additional increase, and we fall into that category. So for us, the Act 1 index was 6.8% this year. So that just means the ability of the school district and the school board would be to go to a maximum mill increase of 2.05 mils. So the other thing that you see here when you look at this, the gold line is where the millage is set, other than the 24-25, that's the proposed. So that is where our millage sits compared to what we could have taxes raised to. So that maroon line there is showing you what it would be with using the full Act 1 increases that is allowable by Pennsylvania. So you see, particularly in these last few years, that index is very high. So that gap between where millage is set and where millage could be set is much greater than it maybe used to be when you see those lines are much more similar together. So again, at the proposal as it is now, that's 4.8%. So that's 2% less than the state maximum. And the other thing to kind of note with this is, if we had taken the index every year for the past 18 years, the millage could be 36.18 mils. So why is this such a large increase? So here is an actual slide of the history of our millage and what it has been for the past 20 years is what you see up here. So we've kept the increases below 1 mil per year since 2008 year. and half a mil or below since 2016-17. So in the past years there, with no increase whatsoever in code during the year of COVID, 2020. The reason why we're seeing an increase this year is because we're proposing to add staff. So that is not something that you really saw in any of these past budgets because there was not enough money to do that. So with the student needs and the Department of Education mandates increasing without increasing funding, that kind of puts us in the position that we're in. And, we're looking at this as an investment, not just in our students, but also the workforce, the property values, and the longevity of our community. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Hess.
All right, so I'm going to talk to you about some of the unfunded laws and mandates. So for special education, you can see here in the gold, maroon and gold, that is the total cost of special education in our district. The gold shows the funding that we get from the federal and state government. And you can see it does not cover the entire cost of what we spend on special education. The maroon is the total cost the district incurs because the government does not offset the funding based on their law and their mandates. So the costs have increased because federal law under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, is not fully funded, and that has not been fully funded since its inception 50 years ago. The government has never fully funded it. And so the federal law requires that all public schools provide a free, appropriate public education to all students. And FAITH, as it's called, has 4 key components. First, it's free at no cost to the parent. It's appropriate that individual education plans outline a program for individual students to meet their unique needs. It's public that students have the same rights to attend public schools as all other children. And the education part guarantees students with disabilities receive related services too. So again, it has not been fully funded for 50 years. So in addition to the law, we have a new mandate from PDE that I told you about earlier, that we must educate all special education students until they turn 22. And this mandate that started at the beginning of the year also came without any additional funding from the federal or state governments. So this means that the district has to comply with mandated class size ratios, specific student-to-teacher ratios, necessary services provided for individualized students, which they need, and also placements. We may not be able to serve their needs in the school district, so we may have to place them in an alternative program. And those can cost anywhere from $20,000 to $80,000 for one student to meet their needs. And if the district fails to comply with meeting IDEA or FAITH, we're at risk of being sued, which can cost us even more money. And the district wants to serve all of our students, especially our special education students. We want to serve them well. But it's evident that the federal and state governments need to fund the laws and the mandates that they have put forth for us to follow. And so I'll repeat again, for 50 years, IDEA has not been fully funded. Our other growing population is our English language learner population. And as you saw in our district demographics, our population reflects that growth. And so as you look at the graph in front of you, you'll see an increase in the numbers at the bottom in the yellow. So that's the increase each year of students who are moving into our district who are English language learners. It shows that growth across the years, and you see a significant growth here from 4.2 to 4.9 to the 6.1%. And these are move-ins out of the students who are already here who are English language learners. So because of that significant increase in our English language learner population, as well as our special ed population needs, that is why we are asking for additions to staffing so that we can meet what's required by the law and we can also do what's best for all of our students. So as you can see here, at Conroe Elementary, we need 2 additional elementary autistic support teachers. There are 32 students, and we can only have 8 students in a class, and that's by law. Mifflin Park, we need an emotional support teacher. We're going to have 22 emotional support students next year, and there are 12 students per caseload. That's the maximum amount. We need another English as a second language teacher because of our growth in ELL students at Mifflin Park. At the high school, we need a high school autistic support teacher. We currently do not have a continuum of support for those students who are autistic, and many are placed out of district, so that if we put a teacher there, we're hoping to be able to bring some students back from those high-cost placements. We also need another English language learner teacher at the high school because of the growth of our ELL students. And district-wide, because of the needs of our special ed students, a school psychologist. The recommended caseload for a school psychologist is 1 to 500. With the addition of the school psychologist, we'll be at 1 to 716. So we're not even asking for the max that we would need to meet the recommended caseload for those students. At GMIS, we are also asking for a grade 6 classroom teacher to create more equitable class sizes across grade levels. So with the addition of the staff, specifically with the special education professional staff, we need staffing additions in terms of paraprofessionals. And as you can see here, because of the needs at Conroe Elementary and those 2 autistic support classrooms, we need 6 paraprofessionals to support those students. At Mifflin Park, we need 4.5 paraprofessionals. 0.5 increasing hours for 1 position, 3 emotional support classroom paraprofessionals, 1 replacing a vendor that we have not previously budgeted for. At the intermediate school, we need 0.5 paraprofessional, half day, learning support, reducing 3 hours of aid time elsewhere. And at the middle school, 4 paraprofessionals, 1 for physical support for a student, a one-on-one, 2 for emotional support, and 1 for life skills. At the high school, 4 paraprofessionals, 1 for life skills, 1 for itinerant autistic support, because we now have that support at the high school with a professional autistic support teacher, 1 supplemental emotional support, and 1 autistic support behavioral support for students. So that's 19 additional support positions that are necessary because of the law that is not fully funded by the government. We also have staff negotiations going on. So ASME is currently negotiating their contract. And what's very interesting is 75% of our ASME employees are district residents. So through this negotiation, we are supporting our own community. 31% of them are long-term employees of 10 years and more. So they've stayed here and they're committed to the district. So like I said, the negotiations are still in progress, but they will affect the budget as they come near. So, I'm sure you've heard about the rumors about the GMAT. And yes, people are saying, why are my taxes going to go up because of the GMAT? That's not the case. That was never the case. And so we want to make that clear. So the budget increase for this year has nothing to do with the GMAT, the building. So, how is the GMAT paid for? We restructured the current debt that we had using historically low interest rates over COVID. And so we were able to do that and not have the tax increase. And all payments for construction are drawn from a construction fund, not the tax dollars that are in the general fund. There is no overlap with those. So, our tax dollars used for day-to-day operations of the GMAC, of course, our students are using it all the time, and I'm having trouble trying to find time for the community to be able to come in there. Our students are utilizing every inch of that building. And so we need staffing to take care of that, and so 3 custodial positions take care of that building during the day. The utilities estimated 8 to 10 increase, or just below 10% of the total utility cost for the district. And so why did we build a GMAT? So I'm hoping this is the last time we'll have to go over this, because we've been going over this for a long, long time. And so GMAC was the phase 2 of the district's plan. And in phase 3, we are going to take the existing gym spaces out of the middle school and high school so that we can create STEM learning spaces as well as a well-needed performance arts area for both the middle school and the high school. And so GMAC was the most impactful fiscally responsible option. In 2018, I remember sitting in the middle school with community members, students, business owners, board members, and when it came down to it, they told us that for just the mechanicals and to get up to code would be $40 million. And I remember somebody saying, we're going to cut a ribbon on that? That's going to be what we're going to have for our students? We're not going to have anything else but new mechanicals and the building up to code? So what we did was we took a look at a lot of options. And the best financially responsible option was to build a GMAC and take the room out of the gyms, take the gyms out of the schools, and create the learning spaces that are necessary for our students. So now I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to talk about grants.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about grants now, and one of the reasons we're talking about grants is because we want to talk about the ESSER funds that flowed through the district over the past few years. The significant amount of money that came through. So we want to make sure the community is aware of how that was spent, where that goes. But when it comes to grant money, we have specific codes that we set with those so that we're able to track the exact revenues in and expenses out. They have to be a dollar for dollar match. We file quarterly reports on that with the state. So what that does is as we spend some of the money, then they increase the payments that we get to keep up with our cash flows so that we're able to cover those costs from the grant. And at the end of the year, we file a final report with them. So all of the grants that we receive as a district all have to be done the same way, whether it's federal or state. We're required to report absolutely every dollar we spend. So ESSER 2, that was one of the first. I don't have the slide for ESSER 1 on here. That was spent in 2020 and 2021. But I do have ESSER 2 on here. This was $2,045,520. So this was spent last year. It was completed. So it was over 2 years. And this shows you what we spent that on, what we had to do to keep operations running during COVID. Contract tracing and supplies for our students. One of the other big things that we used this money for was a contract for substitute teachers. With all the absences, we had to make sure we could fill those classrooms when teachers were not in. So we had a contract for that we used funding in this allocation and I believe some of ESSER 3 as well. That's something we still have, that contract for the substitute. So that's something that's back in our budget as something that we're not getting any additional funding to help us cover at this point. We also used some of the grant funds for the construction of the GMAC. So we were able to put HVAC in that building using the ESSER funds. So that was a huge advantage to when our project came to be. And then the ARP ESSER allocation, or ESSER 3, that was $4,137,495. So that was our most significant of those federal grants that will be spent by the end of this year. So we do still have some of those funds in our current budget that we're in. And that was used for learning loss. Again, some of the construction, it was used for professional development. We had social workers being charged in that grant. Now those social workers, we're keeping them, so that's something that is not going to be funded by a grant anymore, or at least not both of them. And operational continuity is the other one there. One of the things that we did was we were able to cover some salaries and benefits with this grant for our staff. So when you see that estimated spend this year of the $683,000, that is all salaries and benefits for current staff. So without that ESSER money next year, that's something that is going right back to our budget that we have to continue to cover, that we hadn't had to in the past. So the next one here is the one from the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. So this is where we get money, it's from the state, and this is what's used on physical safety and mental health. So this grant was used this current year we're in now. We had specific requirements of the grant, it was half and half. So we used the mental health piece was for one of our social workers. And the physical safety and security piece, that was able to put some of the cameras in at the GMAC building to offset those costs. And also it's being used for intruder locks at Brecknock Elementary School. So those locks are, they are electronic classroom locks so that they are more safe than having to potentially go on a lockdown using a physical key in an emergency situation. So that's what we have used that grant for, and that's ongoing right now. And then next year, we have an additional grant from the same agency. So if you recall, the governor's budget wasn't formally set until December of 2023. So that was 6 months into the fiscal year already. However, once it was set, he offered up grants, additional grants. So we went ahead and applied for those grants. So we intend to use these funds next year. We were awarded these 2 grants. So $151,830 on mental health. That will cover one of our social workers and a portion of the other one that had been funded in ESSER. And the other portion for safety and security, much smaller on this side. We are using that on for additional cameras. Our director of operations went through to figure out what buildings had some blind spot areas that were of concern, and those are the areas that we are getting cameras for. And one of the other things that I do want to mention is we did also file for a third. The governor had a competitive grant that was available for safety and security. We applied for that grant to do intruder locks like the ones I mentioned that we're doing at Brecknock. We applied for that to do that at Coomer Elementary School, which is our second neediest building with respect to the way those doors aren't safely locking. So we don't know the certainty of that yet, but we do believe we will be awarded that grant. So that's very exciting news. So more to come on that as we get more information. But that was very exciting. Sometimes the competitive grants, there's only so much money out there and everybody wants them. These other grants that I'm mentioning, those grants, they're ones that are specifically formula based. So they are, if you apply for them, this is what your school district gets, and those are our amounts. So now I'm going to go into the budget highlights for the 24-25 proposed budget. So as we mentioned before, this current proposal includes a $1.45 million increase. That is total revenues of $83,147,644 and total budgeted expenditures of $83,647,644. So this is a deficit budget. That's what you're seeing here. So what that means is if it was a true deficit that was realized, the district would utilize fund balance to cover any, if our revenues and expenses came in exactly as budget. That doesn't always happen exactly, but that is what would take place if that were to occur. So, as I mentioned, this could require use of fund balance. So we're going to talk a little bit about the fund balance. So, fund balance is like reserves that protect the general fund from variability and unknowns. So, this is a history of our fund balance. It's set at the end of the most completed year. So, what I would say our fund balance is now is what you see for 22-23 up there on the screen. So the gray portion that you see there is committed. So committed means that only the board can authorize spending of those funds. So we can't, there's no discretionary spending there that is set by the board. Currently, that $1.2 million is committed to construction. And then, the maroon The maroon is the non-spendable piece of our fund balance. So really all that maroon is like prepaids at the end of the year. So if we fronted cash for something but we haven't expensed it yet because we're waiting to expense it in an upcoming year, that's where that is. And any budgetary reserve, if we budget the budgetary reserve, that's in that category. And then the gold in the center, that's what's our unassigned fund balance. So that is the money that is the reserves of the district that has flexibility in spending. What it also is, though, is it's a cushion. It's like a savings account for the district. It helps with our cash flows if there were to be a concern with that. We're able to invest these funds and earn interest. Interest is very lucrative right now. We're able to keep that money earning over 5% pretty much, which is a wonderful thing. We didn't necessarily see that in the past. So the total fund balance of the district is about $7.6 million. And that unassigned portion there in the gold, that's $5.8 million. So that percentage, it's 6.9% of our expenditure budget. And the reason that's important is because we do have board policy that requires that stays at a minimum of 5%. And PDE has a maximum to that of 8%. So we can't have more than 8% of our budgeted expenditures if there's any type of tax increase. So the other thing to just keep in mind, though, is that's not a lot of money for an $83 million budget. But we do keep that there in those reserves, like a savings, like any of you might have, and that's what that's used for. The other thing just to mention, since I'm talking about reserves, we also have a capital reserve fund. So that's a completely separate fund from any of the funds we've spoken about tonight. That is where the capital improvements are taken out of. So when we need a new roof, paving, things like that, those large ticket items that we need for regular maintenance of our buildings in our district, those things come out of the capital reserve account. And what happens at the end of the year, we don't traditionally change much with our fund balance. As you see, it stays. Some of those unknowns change a little, but it stays pretty solid. We move any surplus funds to that capital reserve fund. And then that's this very restricted savings account. So you can't do whatever you want with that money because it must be used for capital purchases. And any of those capital items that we purchase or improvements that we do through that fund are always board approved prior to that. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the assessments in our district. So this slide is showing you how that's broken down. So 79% is residential. And that's not a surprise. And that is traditionally where we see our assessments fall every year. So 1.2 billion of our assessment is made up of residential homeowners. Our commercial is only 205 million compared to that. So it's definitely, we're definitely heavily made up of residents here in Governor Level. You also see then apartments, that's 47 million. The gray is industrial, I believe, no, farm, I'm sorry. Farm, 60 million in farm, and then 25 million in industrial. So that just gives you a makeup of what our district is like. So one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit more about is the declining assessments of our district. They're not increasing any longer like they maybe once had in the past. So that, when you look at that 1.2 billion number there for residential, that's actually 2 million less than it was last year. So that's lost revenue of about $71,000 when not anything happening on that. So the commercial, that was about $1 million less than last year, which is $30,000 in revenue loss. So I mean, right there is a teaching position, if you think about it that way. And again, that's with nothing happening. There would be a decrease in what we would see in our real estate taxes. But I do want to make sure we highlight homestead, which is something that anyone who is a resident homeowner should make sure you have on your property. So the homestead just means that if you own a home in the district and you live in that home, you qualify. That's all you need to do to qualify. And what we're able to do is the state gives us an allocation of funds. Now, we didn't get it yet this year. It'll be May 1. We'll find out how much that is. And we give those funds directly back to taxpayers on their tax bills. So what that is, they give us a number, we take all those properties, we divide it out, and it goes as a subtraction right up there on the corner of the bill directly back to the homeowners. So it's not built in anywhere else. It's directly to taxpayer. One of the things that's proposed next year is that the governor's going to increase that. So, as I said, it'll be May 1 when we'll find out, but currently, he proposed putting $900 million in the state into that. It's property, we call it the property tax rebate piece, but it's state gambling monies. And that's $150 million more than he put in last year, which was, the past 2 years had been an increase from what we had typically seen in the past. So we're hoping that that will come in advantageously, and we will know more on May 1st about that. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I don't think we've really ever mentioned in our budget town hall presentations is the school district has a property tax rebate program for our senior citizens and those on disability. So that's something that people might not be aware of. So I wanted to make sure we brought that up. So if you qualify, again, you have to be a resident homeowner, but if you qualify for the state's property tax rebate, you automatically qualify for ours. And then we have a scale of money we give back to you based on that criteria. So it's a form on our district website, and some of the local tax preparers are aware of it. It's very unique to Governor Mifflin that we allocate funds to this every year, but that is allocated to give directly back to, so if someone on a fixed income should definitely consider looking into that, because that might very well be something that they qualify for, that we can offer. So here is over the years, when I was talking about the decline in assessment, 2024 assessment is lower than you've ever seen on this chart. And this is 10 years here. When I looked back, I think 2009 was the last time our assessment was this low. So it's really something that has to be considered because it is, we've been very blessed in the past to have that growth, which usually is typical. That's not what we're seeing anymore. And while there might actually be growth, people are doing, adding on to their homes or building houses, it's not keeping pace with what's getting reduced. And we've talked before about the CLR and how with great disparity between what an assessment is and what property might be worth today, that huge discrepancy is a factor in. So if you're someone who maybe when the CLR was in the 60s, 60%, if you built a home then you were assessed at that 60% and our CLR is now down at about 30, you're gonna appeal your assessment and they're gonna pull it down for you to make you in line with what they think the county should be. So it's a state created metric to try to even everything out. So that's just the way it is right now. I don't foresee that that's going to be increasing based on the current market. I think that's going to continue to be as it is. So it's just really something to keep in mind as we look at these assessments that, if we don't have growth and if we don't bring businesses in, there's not much more we can do when it comes to that. All right, so now we're going to look a little more about our revenues. So this shows you the local, the state, and the federal share of what is in our revenues. So right off the bat, you see federal is only 1.3%. Federal is very low. It was a little higher when we had those ESSER funds we were talking about flowing in. Now we're back to just our typical federal programs. These are our title grants and our access program. That's all we do get there with federal. The local is almost 70% of our revenue. And of that 70%, 82% of that is property taxes. So that's where that comes. The other large item when it comes to local revenue would be EIT revenue. That's earned income tax. So that's wages. That maybe if you're familiar with looking at your paycheck, or some of those taxes that you pay in your paycheck, those things collected by Berks EIT are distributed to the districts for where those residents work. So that's the other large portion. EIT revenue is almost $6 million. So it is pretty big, and it has been increasing. And then the other thing that we're looking at here would be the state share. So 28.9%, not a huge share of what we have in total revenue, and that just kind of shows you where we get our funds, what we have control over, right? We don't really have control over anything but that local side of those funds. Now we're going to look at it by source a little differently. So the total increase in revenue is budgeted at 4%. And again, we talked about the federal here. When you look, you can see there are those slides, 21, 22, 23, 2020, all those years where we had COVID funds, those extra funds coming into our district. We no longer have those in there. We do see a little uptick on the state there. So things are starting to improve. Two little things that we recently got in terms of the state. A Ready to Learn block grant was increased by $250,000, and they're telling us that will continue. We use that to help fund full-day kindergarten in our district. And we did get approved for our third pre-K classroom. That's a $600,000 grant that flows through the state in terms of revenue that we use for that very important program. So when it comes to the state and the basic education formula, the current governor's budget, he is anticipating putting $200 million in basic ed funding through the formula. And the formula is just metric driven. It's a big formula too, but it's metric driven by district, specific district statistics that they put in there. They average them out. So then he puts this money in, and it's a way to try to share of that money, that $200 million, across all 500 some districts in the state. So when he puts the 200 in, everybody's metrics are in there, everybody gets their number, and at the bottom it sums up to $200 million. That's how he distributes those funds. So that is currently in next year's budget for that increase. So that will be about $320,000 more than the past year. So it is more, but it's not significant. One of the other things that was really big in his budget was adequacy, and that was partly because the Basic Education Funding Commission has put out a report saying you need to fairly fund education. And we talked about that, Dr. Hess talked about that, how important it is for that to take place. We're a district that would greatly benefit from that because we aren't adequately funded by the state. And I think you can see that in what we're presenting to you. So that $1 billion, the rest of that $1 billion is proposed to go through that adequacy. And at this point, it's completely new and highly unknown what's going to happen with that. We can't risk putting something like that in our budget with such an unknown. As I mentioned before, the governor didn't actually complete his budget until December of 2023. We hope it'll be sooner this year, but I don't believe we're going to have the state is going to pass their budget by June 30th, which is the same deadline we face as a school but the state doesn't have repercussions for not doing their budget. So that adequacy, though, is really recognizing that they need to direct the investments in education to the schools that need them, not just through the formula that I talked about, which is just very generic. It's really trying to drive home that there are schools who need those funds because of a variety of factors that aren't even considered in the regular basic ed formula.
Kelly, can you tell them how much money that would be if we got the adequacy funding?
That would be about $3 million. And that would be $3 million. Oh, and that would be potentially, it's a 7-year phase-in plan. That would be $3 million every year for 7 years. So it's a huge number, but it really shows you how much need we have as a district and how important it would be for the state to do that. Because again, as I mentioned, we really don't know. It's completely new. It's the first time we've ever seen anything like it before. And unfortunately, it's an election year. And what I'm told is things tend not to get done in an election year because everybody is fighting for their seat. Whether that's the case, I don't know. But that is what we're looking at. So now we'll talk a little more about our expenditures. So again, budgeted expenditures, $83,647,644. Again, 4% increase. So instruction, it's 60% of our budget. That's about $50 million. That instruction line at the bottom there, that's direct in front of kids expenditures. So that's where almost all of our money's going. And we're school, so of course it is. So the support, that's 31%. So support services, those are the behind the scenes roles that help the school. So it would be like administration, transportation, health, technology, those types of support areas that support our teachers and our students. That is what you see there. That's about 31% of our expenditures when you look at it by function. And then non-instructional services, that's athletics and community services. So that's not even $2 million. So that's 2% of our budget there on that line. And we do track that all separately. And then debt service, that's 7% of our expenditures. So when Dr. Hess said earlier about the building, the debt payments that we make have always been made. We've always had debt. When we took on we refinanced, we took on the new debt, the payments stayed the same because of the restructuring and the low interest. So we would have been out of debt maybe in I think 2035. Now the debt is structured to 2046. So when we talk about how that worked, how that we were able to get those funds into that fund, that's how we were able to do that. And that's the line item that you see there that pays it. And that's something that line stays, as I said, is pretty much the standard every year is what you see there. So here we're comparing it by object. So when we talk about the objects in our like account coding structure, the objects are like the what is it that we're purchasing versus the who is purchasing it, which is what the function is. So salaries and benefits, of course, are going to make up the most of our budget. So that's 70% of our budget right there. So that's the maroon and the gold there. That's salaries and benefits. And then you see that from the prior year, you do see an increase there. We did propose to add staff this year. So that's one of the reasons why. We also talked a little bit about, earlier Dr. Hess talked a little bit about the contractual obligations that we have as a district. So we are in negotiations with our support staff right now. They are a union, they're bargaining units, so we're currently negotiating with them for what their wage increase will look like for next year. And next year then, our GMEA contract will be up as well. So that will be something that we'll be talking about next year. in our budget. And the other piece with benefits, PSERS has actually gone down 1/10 of a point this year, 1/10%, which is interesting. It was 34% this year, is budgeted at 33.9% next year, but it's still a very large percent. That is the Pennsylvania Employee Retirement System. So that's not an optional cost of the district. That benefit is something we must provide every single employee. Even our part-time employees have PSERS taken out of their pay. There's an employer side, which is what we talk about when we talk about our budget, and the employee pays as well. So they are paying a share of that, not of the 33%, though. Theirs is separate. So when you look at what PSERS gets, they're getting what we call the employer contributions. They're also getting employee contributions separately that people are putting in towards that retirement. So that's a big number when you consider when you do add staff. It's a big piece of what goes with that. We've also seen an increase on the benefits side with insurances. So the dental rates, though dental is not a huge cost, they're up 14% from last year. And medical, which is a huge cost. That's currently budgeted with an increase of 12.5%. So the district, we're part of the Berks County Health Trust. Not all, but most schools in the county are in that health trust. It's like a pooled consortium of healthcare. They have not set their rate. They told us May 15th because they're hoping to make some changes to the plan still in an effort to bring that down. But we're not anticipating that is really going to change much from the 12.5% that's currently budgeted there for that. So then the remaining objects up there, there's 30% to the purchase services. That's that kind of like orangey color there that you see. So purchase services are contracts. So when we mentioned before our Kelly Services contract, that would be there. Transportation is within that. Our utilities are in that cost. And charter school tuition and placements are there. So we talked before about what sometimes can happen if we can't provide education for our students. They might be placed somewhere at a cost to the district. It would be in that orange area. And the other big piece is charter schools. So there is currently in this budget $1.25 million in the budget for charter schools. Based on where we're at now, that's not enough to fund what we would need to fund for next year. Our costs will be even higher, but we're hoping that we can bring some of those kids back into our schools because we can support those kids with a virtual learning option better than what maybe a charter school could. So one of the really odd things about charter schools is their tuition. It's a formula that tells you how much you pay for your kids that are sent there. So it's a calculation of our expenditures and our students, and that's how they tell us how much our tuition is for a kid. So it has nothing to do with what it costs them to educate a student. It's what they think it costs us to educate a student. So what our rate isn't the same as what Muhlenberg's rate is or Missing's rate is. So it's really a little bit odd. There are some proposed laws that might address that. We'll see. It's definitely something that needs to be talked about more because it's just it's a very extremely high cost of the district. So the little bluish gray there, that's supplies. So supplies really don't make up that much of our budget. Those are the areas that we typically are allocating to department chairs and building principals to use in their departments, in their buildings, in their classrooms, on a day-to-day basis. That's ends up being a pretty small piece. And then again, debt being 7%, that purple there. Typically from year to year, there's not a huge change. There was a little blip last year with paying off one of our debt service payments that shows like last year because it's just a little bit higher there. And we're going to come back to the special education cost slide again, talking, again, more about how our costs are increasing so much faster than the state and federal share of those costs. So this special education subsidy is driven out of a formula similar to when I talked about the basic education payments that we get on our subsidy. So it takes a look at our students and calculates how much they're going to give us. But what it fails to be able to calculate when it just looks at a number is really like you're going to have to, one more student in a classroom might require an entire another teacher in order to make sure we meet those mandated class sizes. So there's no way the formula can really tell us that, because that isn't what it's driving. It's just driving on sheer counts, not on saying, oh, well, that's going to make you have a whole nother classroom now, so we're going to give you this much more because you need another classroom with another teacher and with aides. It doesn't account for those kinds of things. And those are the kinds of things that when we talk about this, those are the kinds of things that are important to remember, is even though it is sort of based on the number of students, it isn't giving you the full picture of what kind of money we need to be able to provide what we need to provide for the students. So this 14.6 million that you see for 24-25, that's 17.5% of our whole budget. So it's a pretty big percentage of our budget that goes to this, with, again, a state subsidy of $3.1 million and about $700,000 is the federal IDEA dollars that go in to make up that piece there. So overall, if you look between the bottom here, the 2.7 million from 2015 to 10 years now, that's about $1 million over those 10 years there that you see. And our costs from 23 just to 24 alone increased over $1 million in 1 year. So it's just really important that we advocate for fair funding from the state in order to be able to help cover these costs and provide what we need to provide for our students. I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Hess.
So, how can we learn more about our district budget? So, these are very specific parts of our website that you can go to learn about different aspects of the budget. These are the places where you can go to get the facts. I know there are many places on Facebook and social media that say they're giving you the facts about the government school district budget, but that's not the case, because the facts are here with us in what we do, in the reports we have, the funding formulas that are known, and the budget that we keep. And so I ask that you go to these specific websites to get your facts, because other places can be steeped in opinion, misinformation, and basically sometimes very manipulated information. So if you have questions, I want you to reach out to either myself or Kelly. We're happy to sit down with you to talk about the budget. There's a few things I want to say before we end tonight. Number one, I want you to remember, the GMAC is not causing a tax increase. The GMAC is not causing a tax increase. Never was intended to, never will. Okay? The second thing, you heard from Kelly that we don't have adequate funding for our school district. And if we did, we'd get $3 million from the state this year, and $3 million after that, and after that, and after that. The other thing is for-profit cyber charter schools are taking our money, and we will work as hard as possible to get our students back. But I need you to advocate for us that those funds are way too high. $13,000 for a regular ed student, 30-some thousand a year for a special ed student. Those are crazy numbers, and it's based on nothing. So what I have up here are our local representatives. I ask that you advocate for us, for funding, with Senator Scott Martin, Senator Judy Schwank, Representative Zimmerman, Representative Mark Gillen, and Representative Annie Guzman. They are the people who can make the difference in getting us the funding that we need. Whether it's the special ed funding that needs to be increased, the adequacy funding that would get us funded to the point that we need to be, or just to advocate for education, public education overall. So I ask that you do that for us, for you, because as you see, over 80% of our budget, local taxes. Local taxes, we're dependent on you. If we build a warehouse, millions of dollars would come into the budget. That's not happening. Commercial places are not building, and we'll work on that. I'm going to try to work with the community on that. But I ask that you advocate with our state representatives and senators to let them know what's happening here at Governor Mifflin and what your taxes, that our local taxes are so dependent on, we are so dependent on local tax base, and that we need their help. So I thank you for being here tonight, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.